One of the key architects shaping U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for nearly 4 years has been U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. CBN News sat down with Ambassador Friedman for his last official interview in the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Ambassador David Friedman ended his time as ambassador as he began it, by praying at the Western Wall.
Ambassador David Friedman.
Friedman feels work accomplished over the past 4 years will help the incoming Biden administration get off to a good start.
Normally, people come into office and the Middle East is all ablaze, and that becomes a challenge. I think that's not the case here. I think we've left the Middle East in a good place. I would urge real caution in changing any of the dynamic. It ain't broke, so don't fix it.
That includes potentially renewing the Iranian nuclear deal. The Trump administration ended the 2015 agreement known as the JCPOA that had been struck by the Obama administration. Are you concerned about the fact that the Biden administration has already said that they want to renegotiate or re-enter the Iranian nuclear deal?
Boy, going back to 2015 would just be an enormous mistake, and it could threaten all the advances that we've made in the region. There really is no rational basis to return to the JCPOA. You know, one of the arguments that kept coming up then in favor of the JCPOA was, if we let Iran back into the community of nations, they will self-modulate, they will self-correct. 5 years later, we know the truth. We know that they didn't self-correct. The idea that we would make a deal with Iran that would give them a path to a bomb is, frankly, insanity.
Friedman also believes such a move could threaten the Abraham Accords, an achievement that took many by surprise, but not Friedman.
The seeds of these relationships have been there for years. They were there under the Obama administration as well. They were there. They needed some water, they needed some fertilizer, they needed some real engagement. But we knew from the beginning that we were onto something.
Ambassador Friedman pointed out what set the Trump administration apart.
What I think I'm most proud of is that our administration really extended to Israel not just the courtesy, but the right to self-determination, to really decide for themselves how to govern. And I hope that courtesy continues to be extended, because that's where I think we really made a difference.
That set the stage for historic moves, such as the United States recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, declaring Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and moving the U.S. Embassy there.
I think the most significant event of the 4 years was moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I think so much came from that. You know, I think when we moved the embassy, when we recognized Jerusalem, I think it just opened up enormous possibilities for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I think it put America really on the right track.
Friedman also helped change the U.S. approach to Israel's biblical heartland and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
What we did was very much in the best interests of the United States, not just the best interests of Israel. And I think the proof is in the fact that after we moved the embassy and after we recognized sovereignty over the Golan Heights and after we did all the other things that we did, not only was there not an explosion of violence, but there was an explosion of peace. We were able to achieve, once-in-a-generation agreements with Bahrain and the Emirates, Sudan, Morocco, Kosovo, all Muslim countries.
As ambassador, one Bible story inspired Friedman. He kept this painting of the story of the sin of the 10 spies who went into the Promised Land.
The one sin I don't want to commit is the sin of the spies, the sin of not having enough faith or confidence or vision in the relationship between Israel and the United States and the importance of keeping that as strong as possible.
While the new administration hasn't announced a replacement, many experts on both sides agree Ambassador Friedman will be a tough act to follow. Up next, more of our interview with Ambassador David Friedman, where he discusses the Abraham Accords and Israel's biblical heartland.
CBN Films presents.
It's a very corrupt period in Jewish history at this time.
Written in stone, Jesus of Nazareth.
The emotion is one thing, but the scientific truth is something else.
The life of Jesus changed the entire world.
Jesus walked on this particular street.
But what does archaeology say about where he lived his life?
It's an authentic location in the life of Jesus.
Join Gordon Robertson and unearth remarkable discoveries.
Is it really the place where Jesus spent his last night on earth?
Explore where Jesus traveled.
Jesus went from one Jewish place to another Jewish place.
Where he performed miracles.
And he raised the little girl from the dead.
And where he was tried by Pontius Pilate.
Tradition is wrong.
Get written in stone, Jesus of Nazareth. For a gift of any dollar amount, call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/written in stone.
That changes everything.
A new wave of anti-Semitism is sweeping the globe, and the Jewish state faces hostility at every turn. Now is the time for Christians to support Israel. In CBN's free booklet, Why Christians Stand with Israel, you'll discover why Christians support the Jewish state and why we must stand together with the Jewish people. Get your free copy today. Call now or go to cbn.com/standwithisrael.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
Here's more of our interview with Ambassador Friedman, where he addresses potential dangers to the Abraham Accords and the historic change in U.S. policy towards Israel's biblical heartland. Ambassador Friedman, great to see you again.
Chris, great to be with you again.
One thing that you made history was the Abraham Accords. Does the Iranian nuclear deal threaten the Abraham Accords?
Well, it does because, look, the Abraham Accords were, they're transformational. And of course, they're based on things that go beyond security. They're based on commercial interests and interests of tourism and a warm peace among peoples. But of course, there's also a common enemy. And that was a factor. I mean, all these countries were threatened by Iran. And to elevate that threat could easily cause some of these countries to start retreating into their own national security needs in a way that that might make it much more difficult for them to be as open as they are today. So I would hope that the Abraham Accords could survive anything. They're really important, but they're new and they have to be nurtured. And I do think that the commonality of a common security front against Iran, joined by the United States, is a pillar. It's not the only pillar, but it's one of the pillars upon which these accords rest.
One other thing you made history is you changed the whole paradigm to Israel's biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria. Looking back, how would you express the changes of the U.S. policy toward Judea and Samaria?
Well, look, we brought that policy back to where it belonged. We actually changed it relative to the last 20 years. But if you go back to 1967, when Judea and Samaria became an issue, right? That's when Israel, recaptured the territory from Jordan. There's only one agreement since 1967 that all the litigants, all the conflicting parties agreed to. That was UN Resolution 242. While it's been subject to multiple interpretations, the U.S. interpretation, the one that, because we had our own people, Arthur Goldberg was our negotiator. Our interpretation was that Israel would withdraw from some, but not all of the territories that they captured. Now, they withdrew from 85% or more of it between Sinai and Gaza. They've withdrawn from, the vast majority of the territory that they captured. Judea and Samaria, if you look at our own interpretation of those days, was that the Jews had a better claim, the Israelis had a better claim to Judea and Samaria than any other competing claim. Sure, there should be a resolution. The parties should try to resolve it, but on the basis of a dispute to territory as to which the Israelis probably had the better claim. That was where we were in 1967. We got completely off track to the point where when we took office, we were coming in on the heels of UN 2334, which the U.S. supported. I mean, they abstained, but effectively they supported it because by abstaining, they enabled it to pass, which was a Security Council resolution that found the entirety of Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem, the Western Wall, all illegally occupied territory. So we had gone way off track, and our goal was not to make new law. Our goal was to restore, the original intent of the parties, all the parties, when they got together back in 1967 to try to figure out the framework for resolving, the issues that stemmed from the Six-Day War. And I'm convinced that we're in the right place under international law. I'm certainly convinced that we're in the right place under the American view of international law.
One thing that you and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did was sign an agreement back in October about Ariel University, and where you allowed U.S. investment or funds to go to across the Green Line and support scientific research. How important was that? It
was very important. Look,
is that sort of like a boycott of the U.S. funds that couldn't go to Judea and
you
Samaria?
know, when I learned that U.S. Research funding, we're talking about something which by its nature should be apolitical. Funding, research and science and better understanding. And here you have a university in Ariel, right, which is a major Israeli city. There's no scenario under which Israel would ever relinquish its control of Ariel, nor should it. And you have this university there with 16,000 students, probably at least 1,000 of whom are Palestinian. You have a model for peaceful coexistence in an academic environment among Jews and Arabs, Muslims, Christians. And here the United States is refusing to participate with it in academic research. To me, it was just an unthinkable outcome of these agreements. So yeah, we worked really hard to fix them, and we changed them all. And the United States no longer boycotts, institutions over the Green Line. They never should have, but they don't anymore.
Coming up, part 2 of our interview with Ambassador Friedman, his negotiations with the Palestinian Authority, and his relationship with evangelical Christians.
Now, for a limited time, you can get 5 of CBN's critically acclaimed documentaries. Experience the rebirth of the modern state of Israel.
The historic bond between the Jewish people and the land of Israel cannot be broken.
Relive the battle for Jerusalem in the Six-Day War.
Jerusalem is yours, forever.
Discover how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
When people need us, we volunteer and we come and help.
Explore the world of Israeli technological innovation.
We're people of dreams. God gives us dreams. And that's really the roots, I think, of much of our innovation.
And understand the biggest land dispute in history.
Many Palestinian Arabs claim that the Jews stole Arab land. But is that the real story?
This exclusive Israel DVD collection can be yours for a gift of $40 or more. Call now or go online to get your Israel DVD bundle today.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries, and with your help, we can do even more. We are out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
In part 2 of our interview with Ambassador Friedman, he discusses how the Trump administration dealt with the Palestinian Authority and his relationship with evangelical Christians. Going to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you again made history and changed the whole paradigm. How did you approach that and had the Peace to Prosperity plan that came out last January?
I was asked by a reporter from the New York Times why we were punitive towards the Palestinian. I said, we were never punitive to the Palestinians. He said, well, isn't cutting off funding a punishment? And I said, absolutely not. Our policy towards the Palestinians was we demand a minimal level of accountability. That's it, accountability. The same accountability we would expect from our own people, American citizens, or from the Israeli government. Just accountability. We're giving you money, don't use it to pay terrorists. That sounds like a punishment? How would a US taxpayer dollar ever be used to pay a terrorist? I mean, it's unthinkable. We said, you want to have more autonomy? Well, you have to have religious freedom. You have to have a basic system of human rights. You can't pull people out of their homes who are accused of brokering a sale of a house from an Arab to a Jew. You can't pull them out of their houses and torture them in the middle of the night, which was an experience I had with a dual Palestinian-American citizen. you need to up your game to the point where you are accountable to your own people and you're accountable to your donors. And that to us wasn't punishment. You know, we're going to give money to UNRWA, which creates vile textbooks that foment hatred against Israel, that does absolutely nothing to relieve the suffering of Palestinians, perpetuates their refugee status indefinitely, when every other refugee organization in the world is geared towards resettling refugees. UNRWA does just the opposite. We're going to fund that? No, because we insist upon minimal accountability to international standards of behavior. That was a major shift of the Trump administration, but it was not intended to be punitive at all. And I think ultimately it will help the Palestinian people because it makes their leadership more accountable to them more than anybody else.
One thing you've done during the past 4 years is work with a lot of Christian evangelical Zionists. Describe that situation, that relationship that has grown over the last 4 years.
Well, it's been a great joy because I didn't really know the community well before I got this job. First of all, the Christian evangelical community is enormously important to the relationship, the U.S.-Israel relationship, because there are far more Christian Zionists in America than there are Jewish Zionists. So just in terms of the democratic process in America, it's great to have so many friends on American soil who believe that it's in the U.S. interests to really support Israel. Separate from that, you know, I really have made so many great friends, people who really, I think really believe in the centrality of Israel, not just to their faith, but to their values. People who share my view. I mean, I'm completely aligned with the Christian community on this, that the values that make America great are the values that came out of Jerusalem, as where we're sitting now. You know, Isaiah says, out of Zion shall go forth the law. The great values, the great principles that informed our founding fathers, when they said that in the Declaration of Independence that certain unalienable rights were endowed by our Creator. Well, how do they know that? They knew that by reading the Bible. And where did the Bible come from? It came from right here. So I think that, you know, to me, as I see the United States going through a very difficult time, my own view is that we've become too untethered to our foundational values. That's, I think we need to reconnect. And I'm not suggesting people, you know, necessarily become deeply religious, although I think that has a real intrinsic value in terms of anyone's personal growth. But just understand, you know, where we came from. We came from a common set of values rooted in the Bible. And the more we can study that and understand that, I think we'll see how, you know, all the things we're fighting over now are relatively trivial. And they ought to be easy to overcome. We ought to be able to come together based upon, you know, the roots of our nation, which again are deeply rooted in the Bible. And I think the Christian evangelical community has a role to play there, because they are such a large community. I think deeply respected within the United States.
So, Ambassador Friedman, thanks for your time, and thanks for being with us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.